Fyodor Vasilyev. Fyodor Vasilyev was a peasant from Russia. His first wife, Valentina, gave birth 27 times. Between 1725 and 1765, the two had 69 children, 67 which survived infancy. These were 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. This is the record for the most children born to a single woman. The name, date of birth, and death of all the children are all unknown. Fyodor would marry again, this time his wife bearing 18 children, giving him 87 in total. Several published sources raised doubts as to the veracity of these claims. David Shaler. David Shaler was a former MI5 agent who in 1997 leaked some information to the press about the organization, violating the Official Secrets Act of 1989, which creates an offense for the unlawful disclosure of information by employees of security and intelligence services. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison. In 2009, he became a squatter and began cross-dressing, going by the name Dolores Kane. He also claimed to be the Messiah, here to save humanity. His ex-girlfriend and co-worker, Annie Macon, believes that his battle with the MI5 led to him to have a breakdown. Malachi Love Robinson. Malachi Love Robinson was an individual who was arrested in 2016 for practicing medicine without a license. He was released from prison in September 2019. On December 31st, 2020, he was arrested on charges of theft and fraud. He was a contract employer for a freight company and allegedly diverted more than $9,000 of customer payments into his personal account. Larry Walters. Larry Walters, also known as Lawn Chair Larry, was a truck driver who had a dream of becoming a pilot in the Air Force. With the help of his girlfriend, he attached 45 helium weather balloons to his lawn chair and took flight on July 2, 1982. He intended to fly into the Mojave Desert, but ended up at an altitude of 16,000 feet. He used a pellet gun to shoot down some of the balloons and landed safely. He was airborne for 45 minutes. Upon landing, he was arrested and fined with $1,500 for violating aviation laws. He eventually became a motivational speaker, but struggled to make a career out of it. Sadly, Larry died by suicide in 1993. The lawn chair now resides at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. I think Larry's story stands as a testament to never give up on your dreams, as there is always a way to achieve them no matter the obstacle. While he may no longer be with us, what he did that day is very endearing to me. Bernie Madoff. I'm sure most of you recognize this name. Bernie Madoff pulled off the largest Ponzi scheme in history. By the time he was caught, he made off with $20 billion. In 2009, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison. He died at the age of 82, serving his sentence. Charles Domery. Charles Domery was a Polish soldier in the Prussian and French armies. No matter how much he was fed, it was never enough. He even resorted to eating grass. In 1798, his ship was captured by the British Navy. While in captivity, doctors became intrigued by his insatiable appetite and wanted to test it. And one day, he ate 4 pounds of cow udder, 10 pounds of raw beef, 2 pounds of candles, and 4 bottles of porter. Not once did he vomit or use the restroom. There is no record of Domery after his internment, so it's unknown what happened to him. Mary Toft. Mary Toft was an illiterate woman from Golding, Surrey. In August of 1726, she had a miscarriage. A month later, she delivered lumps of flesh, which may have been from malformed placenta. The parts did not appear to be human. The family called upon midwife John Howard, who described it as the legs of a cat and the leg of a rabbit. Howard then wrote to other doctors and King George I, who sent 2 men to investigate. Toft then became a local celebrity. Eventually, on November 15th, after closer examination by the king's men, it was confirmed that rabbits could not have come from her body. In the dung of one of these rabbits was found traces of hay, corn, and straw. Toft explained her births were caused when she was startled by a rabbit while working in the field. At the time, it was believed that mothers' thoughts and feelings could influence the look of their offspring. Hetty Green. Hetty Green was the wealthiest woman in the world at her time. At the time of her death, her estate valued more than $100 million. She was able to turn an inheritance from her father and aunt of a few $1,000,000 into over $2 billion in today's money. Due to the misogynistic era she lived in, she became known as the Witch of Wall Street. Gottfried Knoke. Gottfried Knoke was a German surgeon who invented his own embalming fluid to create mummified bodies. He began to experiment on unclaimed bodies from the Federal War. Over time, he created a liquid that could be injected into corpses that would keep the body pristine without needing to remove any organs. Knoke died in 1926, being preserved in his own liquid. The exact substance used to preserve his corpses has never been discovered. Scientists think it might be based on aluminum chloride. Rosemary Brown. Rosemary Brown was a pianist who claimed that deceased musicians spoke to her. At the age of 7, she claimed to have been visited by the spirit of Franz Liszt. Other artists include Bach, Beethoven, and even John Lennon. Musicologists and psychologists came to the conclusion that Brown's compositions were of her own subconscious. Poe Toaster. It was a tradition since 1949 for someone to go to the grave of Edgar Allan Poe on his birthday and raise a toast to him. Left behind would be the half-drinking bottle of cognac and 3 red roses. This individual, or series of individuals, became known as the Poe Toaster. This happened annually until 2010. From that year, the toaster did not show. Since then, there have been attempts to revive this tradition. Viper. Viper, real name Lee Arthur Carter, is a rapper. At the age of 5, he learned the piano and started rapping at age 9. He released his first album, Lee Dog, which he would later rename Hustlin' Thick, on October 7, 2003. He was an obscure artist until 2013, when the title track of his 2008 album, You Old Cowards Don't Even Smoke Crack, was posted on YouTube. Since then, Viper has released over 1,000 albums, with approximately 15 or so consisting of original material. He believes he is the second coming of Christ. David Johnson. David Johnson is a busker known as the world's famous bushman who scares passerby along Fishman's Wharf in San Francisco, with David being the scarer and Jacob working up the crowd. Both claim to have come up with the act first. Jacobs died in 2014. The police have received several complaints about him, and was charged with 4 misdemeanors that were later cleared in 2004. Picasso. Tim Patch, known as Picasso, is an Australian artist who paints only using his penis and buttocks. I think you can see why this is unusual. I must admit, though, that his artwork is very nice. Wolf Messing. Wolf Messing was a psychic and magician from Poland. His parents wanted him to be a rabbi and sent him to seminary. He ran away on a train to Berlin and did odd jobs, eventually landing in the circus. In his lifetime, he met the likes of Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, Marilyn Monroe, Joseph Stalin, and even had a bounty put on his head by Hitler, all of whom were impressed with his psychic abilities. Leicester Hemingway. Leicester Hemingway is a younger brother of Ernest Hemingway. In 1964, he founded the micronation of New Atlantis on a built raft composed of bamboo, steel, and rock. Its constitution is copied from the U.S. Constitution. By 1965, it had 6 inhabitants. In 1982, he died by suicide by a gunshot to the head after living with type 2 diabetes for several years. Adam Worth. Adam Worth came to be known as the Napoleon of crime, not only for his short stature, but because anyone good at one field would be called the Napoleon of that thing at the time. He became the basis for the character of Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes. He was born in 1844 in Germany, but moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts when he was 5. He was wounded in battle in August 1862 during the Civil War. When he learned that he had been listed as killed in action, he began enlisting into various regiments under assumed names, receiving a bounty and leaving. After the war, he began to pickpocket. In 1876, Worth stole a painting of Georgiana Cavendish, Duchess of Devonshire. Eventually, he landed in South Africa, where he stole $500,000 in uncut diamonds. Worth would get caught in October of 1892 by police in Belgium. The following year, he was sentenced to 7 years for robbery. Worth died in 1902. Peter Stump. Peter Stump was a cannibal and werewolf enthusiast from the 16th century who came to be known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. He said that he'd been practicing black magic since he was 12. He claims to have met a devil that gave him a magical belt that, When warned, would transform him into a werewolf. In total, he consumed 14 minors, one of these, supposedly his own son, and 2 pregnant women. He was sentenced to death. Frank Chu. Frank Chu is a professional protester from San Francisco. He generally spends all day talking about the 12 galaxies, an alien race that have conspired with former US presidents to film him against his will for the TV show The Richest Family, and are embezzling royalties owed to him. Frederick Bourdon. Frederick Bourdon was a serial imposter known as the Chameleon for stealing 500 identities. In 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barclay went missing. 3 years later, his family received a phone call from Spain saying that he was okay. In reality, it was Frederick. Bourdon was then flown to the US and spent 5 months with the family. In 1997, an investigator felt that something wasn't right. He compared a photo to Bourdon and Nicholas and saw they did not match. The following year, the FBI received the court order to take a sample of Bourdon's DNA and fingerprint. He was then sentenced to 6 years in prison. Barclay was never found. Jim Jones. Jim Jones was a cult leader who preached to a congregation known as the People's Temple. He had grown paranoid over the media coverage, so he and the rest of his following moved to a settlement in the remote country of Guyana known as Jonestown. Jones commanded his followers to drink cyanide-laced punch. In total, over 900 people died at Jonestown, including Jones himself, who was found dead with a gunshot into his head. It is uncertain if this was self-inflicted or not. Oscar Ramiro Ortega Hernandez. Ortega Hernandez was the perpetrator in the White House shooting that took place on November 11, 2011. He did not injure or kill anyone, and no one knew it had been under gunfire until 4 days later. He was driven by this hatred by then-President Obama in a so-called mission from God. He was arrested 5 days later in Pennsylvania after his whereabouts were tipped off by the police. On September 18, 2013, he pled to 1 count of injuring a dwelling and 1 count of discharging a firearm. On March 31, 2014, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. John Hinckley Jr. John Hinckley Jr. was an individual who tried to assassinate President Reagan in 1981 in an attempt to impress actress Jodie Foster after seeing her in the movie Taxi Driver. He was found not guilty by insanity. In 2016, he was granted a release on certain conditions. In June of 2022, he is to be granted unconditional release. John runs a YouTube channel where he posts covers of songs on guitar. I will link it down below. Vladimir Demikov. Vladimir Demikov was a Soviet scientist who performed several transplants on animals. In the 50s, he spent several attempts trying to create a 2-headed dog. One of these attempts that was most publicized was in 1959. A German shepherd named Brody Yaga had the head of another dog named Shabga attached to it. This hybrid lived for only 4 days.